good afternoon, depending, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Mirko Henke. I'm currently working at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm, as I mentioned, I wanted to give a brief update about what the Islandora Documentation Interest Group has been up to recently. The interest group had been existing in the Islandora space, or in the Islandora, as part of the Islandora community for quite a long time. I believe it was originally founded in 2014 and was recently kind of revived or reconvened after a brief hiatus. We, as part of our terms of reference, the purpose of this interest group, which is part of an entire collection or a number of different interest groups that have formed in as part of the Islandora community, our main purpose is to coordinate the creation and maintenance of documentation by the Islandora community. And the product of that joint effort of the Islandora community, that is the documentation that for Islandora 8 in its current form you can find under this URL, islandora.github.io/documentation. As you might remember, the Islandora 7 documentation used to live on a Confluence wiki. The Islandora 8 or Islandora 2 documentation has moved to GitHub, also in part to tie in more contributions from the contributors that are actually active on GitHub. And part of the developer community. Our goals include to establishing best practices for the Islandora documentation, establishing collaborative workflows for creating and maintaining the documentation. We do review and discuss documentation related issues, and identify and prioritize documentation gaps and issues based on the feedback from the community. And that's basically also part of the reason why I'm here today. This documentation is only as good or as useful as the community makes it, and as good as the feedback is that we get about this documentation. We have organized, as you might have heard in an earlier Islandora Open meeting in May, organized an audit sprint in April to detect gaps in the existing documentation. With the results of that audit sprint, we held a writing sprint for 2 weeks at the end of May. That led to, I think, in total 17 pull requests against the documentation. But for a documentation sprint or a documentation project, that is actually quite a pretty good turnout. We held our monthly meetings where we try to continue stewarding this collaborative work. As you might have gathered, this is work that we do in collaboration. The people who are part of the documentation interest group cannot be the only ones that write for lack of technical expertise, or also simply for lack of time. But we see our role as being like the stewards or organizers around anything that has to do with documentation. And we just heard this great presentation from Amy and Dara about the migration at Whitman College. we see that a lot of institutions currently are looking into migrating from Islandora 7 to Islandora 8. And myself, I'm currently in a position to do this, or managing a project to migrate from Islandora 7 to Islandora 8. And our goal is ultimately to make documentation that helps everyone in the community in this goal. So one of the planned projects that we are currently undertaking with the Documentation Interest Group is to integrate the Islandora cookbook with the documentation pages, because we've realized that the way Islandora 8 works, being so heavily reliant on Drupal, or so much more reliant on Drupal, allows for like really large amount of flexibility. And there is already in the documentation a number of cookbook recipes or cookbook recipe style documentation that other institutions could reuse if they know about it and if they find the documentation. And Slack is definitely a great place to engage in conversations about these prior experiences that others have made. But we want to kind of try and create a place in the documentation that is more cookbook style that essentially creates a collection of ideas and hopefully tested recipes for people to share and others to reuse. But this is one of the current projects. We're also looking into curating, collecting, and maintaining more documentation about the prerequisites on the Drupal side, or the Drupal fundamentals that system administrators as well as users might need to know when they want to use and configure a Drupal 8 and 9 based Islandora. So this is again work in progress, and part of this presentation is to plug our monthly meetings and ask for contributors, collaborators in the interest groups, as well as in general participation in documentation sprints that we host. And most importantly, we really would like to see contributions in terms of issues, documentation page improvements that you can make through GitHub. If you have a recipe that you're willing to share, or if you have any kind of gap that you're willing to fill in the documentation, please reach out to us and support the Islandora documentation to make it a rich and useful tool for people to reuse. As I said, we have meetings every second Wednesday of the month. If you go to the GitHub repository where we host the agendas, there is a link in the most current agenda for the Zoom meeting. But you can also reach out to us on Slack or through the community mailing list if you want to get an invite for our meetings. And with that plug, I guess